we heading for an election on December 12th then? We're expecting MPs to vote for it on Monday.
Yeah, indeed. So a vote on that on Monday. Naira and Matt, good morning. Whether we actually get there, though, is a big question still. You talked about the catch-22 situation that we find ourselves in, because remember, Boris Johnson doesn't have the power to call this election alone. He needs, according to the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, 2/3 of MPs to back him, which is why the stance of the Labour Party, the opposition party, matters. And you talked about how they're dependent on the EU. The EU's dependent on the decisions Labour makes. We end up in this catch-22, or this kind of British political doom loop, it would seem. There are two ways to view both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn in this. On the one hand, you can say that Boris Johnson, look, he's caught in an unsustainable parliament. He needs to do something. He says he wants to bring an end to this nightmare. But unfavourably, you could say, well, is he just trying to distract us from the fact that he's not going to deliver Brexit by October the 31st? And he said that so many times that that would be the thing that he would deliver, do or die. From Jeremy Corbyn's perspective, you can say, well, sure, there is no deal still on the table. The EU has not extended, so you can understand why he won't back an election just yet. Or if you're looking at it less favourably, you can say, well, maybe he's frightened of the polling, and the polling doesn't suggest perhaps that he will do very well up against Boris Johnson.
What about, the possibility of a no-deal Brexit? Does that come closer if there is no agreement on holding an election, because then Europe won't make an agreement on extending Brexit?
Well, it depends very much on what Europe says, and I know Maria's going to take us through the European side of this and the thinking there shortly, but it does depend, Matt, on what kind of duration of extension we get, how flexible that extension is going to be, how responsive that extension is going to be to UK political developments, because Boris Johnson is nervous that if he gets an extension until the end of January, and we heard this from Ian Duncan-Smith this week, one of his Conservative Party colleagues, that the opposition will just fill it with talk and there won't be much decision-making, and we'll get up again against another deadline. And so these no-deal threats or cliff edges just keep on coming, and that still remains an issue for markets. But in the meantime, we wait to see what the EU says. There are other ways, of course, that the UK government could try and get through to an election. Calling a vote of no confidence in itself, strange thing to do, perhaps, but these are strange times. It looks as if we might be running out of time to do that. And the other one is a one-line bill, just trying to push it through Parliament with a date attached to it. Could the opposition try and change the date? And, that requires just a majority rather than 2/3, so maybe easier, but there are headwinds everywhere.
Maria, let's turn to you. Great to have you with us as well. Does a potential election change the timing of the EU's decision on an extension in terms of when they might decide it, but also change the potential length of the extension? What's the thinking here?
It does, and it's both. And the Europeans at this point have made it clear they really hate to be seen as interfering or being dragged into UK politics. And today they feel that anything they decide will be seen as either trying to stop the election or helping Boris Johnson get the election. So it is a tricky situation for European ambassadors today, who are supposed to come up with a decision on the extension. Now, there is an idea that's being floated, a two-tier extension that is gaining momentum. Essentially, what you look at is two different set of deadlines, a short extension that would be due mid-November. This is something that President Emmanuel Macron has been pushing for, to try to ratify the deal very quickly. If that's not possible, then the second part of the extension would kick in, and that would take us all the way to the end of January 2020. And that's what the UK asked in a letter. But there is a sense today that the UK politics are making this decision difficult. We may not get an answer today, and the idea, the possibility of a summit has actually risen.